So it's only a brief talk. That intro was actually almost kind of the first section of the talk. But basically, what we're going to do is we're going to briefly introduce TerraZero as a project and kind of a very brief history of it. And then we're going to dive into one of the kind of experiments that we did a few years ago, which was Flowertokens. So TerraZero as a project, it initially started in 2016 with as a concept piece where we published a white paper that was basically looking at how we could utilize blockchain tech to create autonomous ecosystems. So we were building on the kind of narrative device of a self-owning forest, on top of which we could instantiate a DAO which would own and manage this forest and kind of bring about a self-owning, self-managing ecosystem, which was able to be kind of protected from, I suppose, damaging, kind of the current damaging ecological activities across the board, as well as properly managed so as to keep the ecosystem healthy. And the more underlying question that facilitated this was also, how could we use something like blockchain technology or something like DAOs to enable non-human actors who are already present within the kind of broader economic system to actually gain the status of active economic agents as opposed to being kind of purely passive. So from this original project, TerraZero then kind of morphed and spread and became more of an umbrella term under which ongoing kind of research and art projects happened, involving, as you already mentioned, Stina, in the introduction, kind of a variety of people, from artists to kind of people who are more into data science, obviously some blockchain developers, and a few of the experiments, which one of which I think is one of the next slides, was a project that we showed, I think 2 years ago at the Shinko Pavilion. Although that slide actually is maybe a good example of the difficulty of trying to pin where TerraZero actually sits. It has a leg in the art world, a leg in the dev world, and some arms elsewhere. So I think this infographic is maybe a good way of trying to explain where we sit. But yeah, so we did a few experiments, like these kind of technical experiments of, okay, say the broader system that we had in the white paper, how would we actually break that down, and like what would these different mechanisms actually look like if you started to trying to apply them to systems? And Flowertokens was this kind of very controlled experiment that we're going to focus on now. So I'll pass it over to Paul.
Yes, give me a second. I'm actually hanging between various tabs, which is a little bit annoying. So yeah, maybe to contextualize the project a little bit. So it was done in 2018, and it kind of followed essentially the rise of sort of digital crypto collectibles such as CryptoKitties, and kind of the first working implementations of the ERC 721 standard. And for us, this was such an interesting sort of opportunity, because we were always interested in sort of the material conditions of token economics, and also obviously natural assets. Natural assets meaning also organisms, and how to represent them in sort of a more distributed ledger manner. And while projects like CryptoKitties sort of provided working examples and sort of were really nice projects for the tokenization of digital fungible assets, there were really little sort of projects which try to reach into the physical space, to say it like this. So who were interested also in the relation between the intangible digital and the material kind of physical spaces. And also there was really little research done in what sort of logic would kind of apply to this physical assets as soon as you sort of try to bind them to digital tokens in a way. So all the question of how does the decentralized verification process would look like in practice, and how can you assure that a digital token sort of like stays truthful to sort of a changing condition of such an underlying asset, where for us like really interesting and sort of a microscopic cosmos, like in a really like small version. And I think the idea itself is quite like simple and also almost like stupid. It's like, okay, you mint these tokens, and they always like, they represent almost like physical like flowers at this stage, right? And yeah, this project kind of tried to make all this kind of research a little bit more tangible. And yeah, at this point, we were kind of really trying to sort of almost make a mixture of like a crypto collectible and sort of a real world flower, and see what this kind of like new category of like crypto token would actually mean for like us as like artists, but also like for the people who actually buy these things and kind of interact with them. So Flowertokens is an installation, which you see here, built in Trust in a co-working space. If you're ever in Berlin, please visit Trust. It's a really nice space. And the system had kind of like accumulate or could hold essentially like 100 plants. And yeah, it consists basically of a 2.4 per 5 meter rack with sort of a semi-automated watering system and like an automated camera system. Let me switch the slide so you can see. So basically, there was like a camera which sort of monitored this whole setup like 24/7, and it took like all the time images which were kind of shown on a website. That's how basically the empty installation looked, and the concept was actually to place all these like 100 flowers there. And since we were pretty like fascinated with this standard, with this ERC 721 standard at this point, we were really interested in like how we could use the metadata, right? It was the first time you could basically build a token which is like individual, which has like individual data attached and which is like not interchangeable. So for us, this was something really interesting because you could sort of like characterize like individuals. And that's what we sort of tried. So we attached like metadata to this token, which kind of was the token ID, or sort of like the age, the kind of size, and the species, if it's alive, if it's blooming, if it's for sale. And we did this essentially for all the 100 flowers in sort of an automated way. And yeah, had this kind of conceptualized this way and then also builded it. So yeah, maybe Max, you can tell something about the interface.
Absolutely. So the interface itself, which was built by Lewis Center and Georgia Hansford, yeah, so the interface was both the viewing and the kind of like marketplace interface for the tokens. So one of the things that I think, if we have time at the end, we'd like to go into was, we kind of didn't quite implement the proper ERC 721 standard. So all of the tokens were kind of bound within the system and the marketplace system that we've described. And yeah, basically this was the main view that you're seeing here. There was a kind of a history scrubber to go through, yeah, all of the different photos that had been accrued of all of the plants. And this is actually a more representative of the original plant. In some of the other photos, you can see the plants actually kind of grew out of shot of the kind of the demarcations that we were trying to use for the computer vision program. So that was the kind of way that the real life didn't kind of quite like to be as neatly spatialized as maybe we originally thought. And yeah, this is kind of the shot of an individual flower. So you can see the owner, whether it's for sale, what the price is, as well as the information about the plant, which was updated once a day from using Plant CV to analyze the photos that have been taken and then actually update the tokens on it, like within the token contract itself. So this is some data showing both the JSON metadata to the right-hand side, and then kind of some of the various stages when we were going through the plant CV.
there's maybe like an interesting point to this, as it kind of like operates almost like in a kind of sort of different matter than like NFT kind of like working today, as we kind of like constantly basically like updating the metadata. So it's sort of like really like comes from like a different conceptualization. So to kind of like represent something which is sort of like living, or which is kind of like constantly changing, you also sort of have to constantly change like the data. So that's obviously also didn't work in like a trustless or in a complete trustless way. So yeah, there was obviously a lot of like social trust required for this.
Yeah, I mean, this system is very much kind of it was very much a kind of like control system where trustless verification wasn't something that we were tackling in that. And yeah, kind of going towards my earlier point, you can see in some of this video the kind of the chaoticness that occurred with the plants, partially just because we were basically with mostly artists and devs, and we didn't take into account what happens when plants grow with a lack of wind. And that is that they get very tall very quickly, but quite spindly, and then fall over. And there were a few interventions in the system. We had to build braces for them, and all of this kind of stuff. Yeah, and I suppose that, so these are just some kind of like making of photos, I suppose, but the photo on the right is basically what we had for the system was, we had this kind of, there was always the question of what happens if a flower dies, right? Like, does the token get burnt? Does it still exist? Because of the fact that the project was really trying to kind of look at what this interrelation is, or like what kind of an interrelation you can actually have between a physical asset, let alone a physical changing asset, and something like an NFT. And so the kind of the end result that we came up with was, if someone wanted to take their plants out of the system, the token would be burned. So that there are, I think there's 1 or 2 plants that currently live at the ocean offices somewhere. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, maybe some last words. We kind of looked a little bit at the contract, and a lot of people sort of approached us also in kind of questioning, okay, this token is not like kind of confirming to the standards, and I want to show it. And also Billy approached us and was kind of like pointing out certain like things we obviously didn't implement really well. If you have seen his talk before, you kind of remember. So we're looking at the moment at the possibility of like kind of really kind of making them ERC compliant, but also linking them to sort of a nice video, as you would see here, because we have a lot of image material which we kind of like never used. Even like a website could actually never sort of like show all the progress, because like it would just crash the browser. There are like so many sort of like images, and so we will sort of like we will sort of like restore them, and everyone who has a token already will then definitely have a new token in the new system, and we will keep you updated on this. TerraZero is always a little bit slow, but we will get through this.